Picture this: you're standing exposed from the waist up, behind a strip of steel barely thicker than a coin, riding a machine built in weeks out of spare parts nobody wanted. Your gun can kill anything on the battlefield. Your armor can't stop a rifle round. That was the reality for thousands of German tank destroyer crews in World War II. Men handed some of the most powerful weapons ever mounted on tracks, and almost none of the protection to survive using them. None of these machines were part of a real plan. Every single one was a panicked reaction. An enemy tank shows up that nothing in the arsenal can kill, so engineers grab the nearest gun, weld it onto whatever chassis is sitting in the factory yard, and ship it to the front before it's even finished being tested. Some of what came out of that process was genuinely brilliant. Some of it was a death sentence on tracks, and some vehicles were both at once. Unstoppable on paper, a coffin in practice. Today we're covering the entire brutal evolution. Every version, every desperate fix, every crew that paid the price for someone else's shortcut. If you want the real story behind the machines of war, not the sanitized textbook version, hit subscribe right now. The War Files does this every single week, and you don't want to miss what's coming. Let's get into it. To understand why Germany kept feeding men into deadly, half-finished war machines, you have to go back to a slaughter that happened 20 years earlier, in the mud of the First World War. In that war, infantry assaults followed a brutal, repeating pattern. Soldiers would push forward, break through the first line of trenches, maybe the second, and then stall completely, because the artillery that was supposed to support them physically couldn't keep up. Field guns weighed tons, and had to be dragged across ground that had already been turned into a cratered wasteland by their own shell fire. Communication between the men at the front and the gun crews miles behind them barely worked. So infantry kept walking into machine guns and fortified positions with no support at all, and dying by the thousands because of it. German planners spent the interwar years obsessed with fixing that exact failure. Their answer was a concept called assault artillery. Armored, mobile firepower that could physically roll forward alongside foot soldiers instead of sitting helplessly behind them. By the time World War II began, Germany had split armored combat into two clean, separate jobs. Killing enemy tanks belonged to the Panzer I, armed with a fast, flat-shooting 37mm gun. Supporting infantry with high explosive firepower belonged to the Panzer IV, carrying a short, stubby 75mm howitzer designed to blow apart bunkers and machine gun nests. A third vehicle, the StuG III, did the same infantry support job as the Panzer IV, but without a turret. Just a fixed gun bolted into a low, armored box called a casemate. Cheaper, lower to the ground, harder to spot, but limited to firing in whatever direction the whole vehicle happened to be pointing. It was a clean, logical system, and it survived for exactly 8 months before it started falling apart. Because that fast little 37mm gun was about to earn itself a brutal nickname among the men who had to use it. The door knocker, a gun that could knock politely on enemy armor and do absolutely nothing else. The first cracks showed up in Poland, when a handful of well-armored French-built tanks in Polish service shrugged off multiple hits and kept rolling. Nobody panicked. Poland fell too fast for it to matter. France was a different story entirely. German anti-tank crews discovered, in the middle of a live campaign, that their standard weapon simply could not kill the best Allied tanks. The French B-1 carried 69mm of frontal armor that the 37mm gun couldn't touch. In one now famous incident, a single B-1 nicknamed UR tore through 13 German tanks in one engagement, and took 140 hits in the process without a single round penetrating. The British Matilda Tilly was arguably worse 70mm of armor, more than double what German guns could punch through at any range. The only weapon that could reliably kill these tanks was the massive 88mm anti-aircraft gun, repurposed on the spot for ground combat. But there were never enough of them. and they were enormous, slow to move, and never designed for this job in the first place. Germany needed a real answer, and needed it fast. Their first attempt was almost comically improvised. Engineers took captured Czechoslovak anti-tank guns, available in large numbers, and bolted them onto the obsolete Panzer I light tank, stripped of its turret. The result was the Panzerjäger, Germany's first purpose-built tank destroyer, and in many ways its most primitive. The crew consisted of a driver sealed inside the hull, and a gunner and loader standing completely exposed above the waist, protected by nothing more than a 14mm gun shield. It worked, barely and only at close range. But the underlying idea, weld a serious gun to a spare chassis, was about to be tested against the most terrifying tanks Germany had ever encountered. If you're the kind of person who actually wants to understand why these machines were built the way they were. Not just what they looked like, but the desperation behind every design choice. That's exactly what this channel is for. Hit subscribe to the War Files right now. Drop a comment telling us which war machine we should cover next. And stick around, because what happens next on the Eastern Front is where this story turns genuinely horrifying for the crews involved. When Germany invaded the Soviet Union in 1941, its intelligence services had almost completely missed two tanks that were about to change the entire war, the T-34 and the KV-1. The T-34's armor was only 45 mm thick, but it was sloped at a steep 60 degrees, giving it the effective protection of roughly 90 mm of flat steel. German 50 mm rounds bounced off it from 500 meters out. The KV-1 was worse. Armored on all sides with 75 mm of steel or more, it was functionally immune to nearly every gun Germany owned. There are documented accounts of KV-1 tanks absorbing dozens of direct hits, driving straight over anti-tank gun positions and machine gunning the crews who just failed to stop them. Germany's response was, again, improvisation under pressure. Roughly 300 captured Soviet field guns were re-chambered to fire high-velocity German ammunition, creating a weapon capable of killing any tank on Earth. Then that gun was bolted onto whatever chassis was sitting around. Capture French artillery tractors, obsolete Panzer II hulls, reliable Czech-built chassis, producing an entire family of stopgap vehicles known as the Marders series. The guns were superb. The vehicles carrying them were death traps. Every Marder variant had the same fatal flaw, an open-topped fighting compartment with barely 10 to 15 millimeters of armor, just enough to stop small arms fire and nothing else. The crew stood exposed on a tall, visible silhouette in the middle of open steppe. Artillery shrapnel showered straight into the compartment. Soviet anti-tank rifles punched through the thin walls like paper. And in city fighting, literally anything, could be dropped on the crew from above. Germany knew this was unsustainable. And the vehicle that finally solved it had already been sitting in service the entire time. The StuG III got the same upgrade the Panzer IV received, a long-barreled 75W Nebu's gun capable of killing a T-34 from beyond a kilometer. Except now, mounted in a low, closed casemate barely 7 feet tall, it wasn't an infantry support vehicle anymore. It was a tank killer, and one that was far harder to spot and far better protected than anything Germany had fielded before. The results were immediate and staggering. The StuG III went on to become the single most produced armored vehicle Germany built in the entire war, over 10,000 units, and, by German claims, it destroyed more enemy tanks than the Tiger and Panther combined. For the first time, Germany had a genuinely sustainable answer instead of a desperate patch job. But sustainable wasn't the same as future-proof. Germany's 75mm guns could handle a T-34 and, at close range, a KV-1. What they couldn't guarantee was killing whatever came next. And on the vast open plains of the Eastern Front, engagements routinely opened at 2 or 3 kilometers, distances where the 75mm's accuracy and penetration collapsed entirely. The answer already existed. It was the legendary 8A Bummy gun. the same weapon that had terrorized tanks since the Spanish Civil War. A dedicated anti-tank version, the Pak-43, could punch through 190 millimeters of steel at 1,000 meters and kill any tank alive from over 2 kilometers away. Nothing was safe from it. The only problem, the towed version weighed over 4 tons, needed a huge crew, and earned the grim nickname, the barn door, for how impossible it was to hide or move quickly. A gun that can kill anything is worthless if it can't get into position before the enemy arrives. So Germany did what it always did. It put the gun on tracks, in at least 4 wildly different ways, ranging from clever improvisation to catastrophic overreach. The first attempt was the Nashorn, literally, rhinoceros, a hybrid chassis carrying the massive 88 mm gun in another open, top compartment, better protected than the Marders before it. The gun was devastating, crews-confirmed kills on T-34s at ranges beyond 4,000 meters, and in one famous engagement near Cologne in 1945, a single Nashorn destroyed the only American M26 Pershing tank deployed in Europe at that point in the war. But the moment artillery started falling nearby, that thin-walled, exposed fighting compartment turned into exactly the kind of coffin the Marder crews had already learned to dread. So the next attempt swung violently to the opposite extreme. The Ferdinand, later renamed Elephant, carried the same devastating gun behind a staggering 200 millimeters of frontal armor, making it nearly invulnerable to anything the Allies could fire at it head-on in 1943. It weighed up to 70 tons, and it was, by almost every account, a rolling catastrophe. Built on a rejected tank chassis powered by an experimental gas-electric drivetrain that had already failed its original trials, the Ferdinand overheated constantly in combat and broke down at a horrifying rate. It didn't even carry a machine gun for close defense, meaning if enemy infantry got close enough, the crew's only option was climbing out of hatches and fighting with pistols from inside what was supposed to be an unstoppable steel fortress. Bridges couldn't hold its weight. Soft ground swallowed it whole. And when one broke down in the field, which happened constantly, there was often no recovery vehicle strong enough to drag it back, meaning the crew of the most heavily armored vehicle on the entire battlefield could end up stranded, defenseless, and waiting to be overrun. Eventually, Germany built something that actually balanced the lessons of every failure before it, the Jagdpanther IV low, fully enclosed, properly sloped, and built from the very beginning as a purpose-designed tank killer rather than a rushed conversion. It stood barely 6 feet tall and performed exceptionally well in the defensive fighting that dominated the war's final year. Then came the vehicle most historians consider the best German tank destroyer of the entire war, and one of its cruelest ironies. The Jagdpanther combined a powerful gun, strong sloped armor, and the genuinely capable Panther tank chassis into a machine that was, on the rare occasions everything worked, almost unbeatable. In its combat debut in Normandy, 3 Jagdpanthers ambushed a column of British Churchill tanks and destroyed 14 of them, while losing only 2 of their own. And both of those losses came not from enemy fire, but from mechanical breakdowns that forced the crews to blow up their own vehicles, rather than let them be captured. That single detail sums up the entire program. Germany planned to build 150 Jagdpanthers a month. Allied bombing and chronic parts shortages meant barely 400 were ever completed in over a year of production. And the Panther chassis carried a notorious weak point: fragile final drive gears that wore out even faster on a turretless vehicle forced to pivot its entire hull to aim. And then there was the Jagdtiger, the heaviest armored fighting vehicle to see combat in the entire war, mounting a naval-derived 120 mm gun so powerful no Allied tank in existence could survive a hit from it at any range. On paper, it was unstoppable. In reality, it weighed 72 tons on an engine barely strong enough to move a tank 20 tons lighter. Its main gun barrel had to be mechanically locked during travel, and the lock could only be released from outside the vehicle, meaning a crew ambushed while repositioning sometimes couldn't fire back until someone climbed out into open fire to unlock it by hand. By late 1944, most of the crews assigned to these machines were inexperienced replacements with barely any training. Roughly 80% of all Jagdtiger losses came not from enemy weapons, but from breakdowns, fuel shortages, or crews destroying their own vehicles to keep them out of Allied hands. For every Jagdtiger killed by the enemy, roughly 4 were destroyed by their own men. And then, almost as a final, quiet twist, came the vehicle that mattered most in the war's last desperate months. Not because it was the best, but because it was the one Germany could still actually build. The Hetzer was small, cheap, and simply barely 7 feet tall, 16 tons, built on a reliable light tank chassis with decent sloped frontal armor and the same effective 75 1-Unreed gun used earlier in the war. It was cramped almost beyond belief for its 4-man crew, and its thin side armor offered no protection at all. But it was fast to produce, hard to spot, and lethal in ambush. And in a war Germany was already losing, that mattered more than any spec sheet ever could. Look at the whole arc of this story, from a Czech gun bolted onto an obsolete light tank, through open-topped Marders, through the Workhorse StuG III, through the armored extremes of the Nashorn and the doomed Ferdinand, through the brilliant but fragile Jagdpanther, all the way to the absurd overreach of the Jagdtiger. And it ends exactly where it began. A powerful gun, mounted on whatever chassis was available, built as fast and as cheaply as possible, and sent to the front because there was simply nothing else left to send. If stories like this are exactly what you come here for, subscribe to the War Files, and tell us in the comments which machine of war we should break down next.